This is a session that I personally am very much looking forward to. I want to be unequivocal that in every aspect of the conceptualizing and the birthing of this organization, whatever it will be, it has been, I think, I can say both very personally important, but I think in this group that is building this, it's politically important for all of us. And I'm going to talk more about that a little bit later when I have a chance to talk to you all about Mijente. But I thought, and we thought it was important to just frame out a little bit what the thinking was. And so part of the reason we're calling this Pro-Blackness is that we are not saying that we shouldn't talk about anti-Blackness. What we're trying to say is we need to talk about that, to name it, to describe it, to understand it in all of the ways it manifests. And what we're trying to come up with is there somewhere for us to move towards? So this idea of pro-Blackness, it's an idea, we need to build it out. And some folks are moving. And I think the question we have to answer is, are we going to move with it? Are we going to get on that train? Are we going to ride that bike? And one of the things I've said over and over again to people in leading up to this convening is, we are preaching to the choir. We want people who are looking for us. We want people to be here who understand that this is an important, if not the most important question of our time. We may not have all the answers. There is a reason we're calling it the jump off, because we ain't got it all together. But we want to be unequivocal in what our intention is and why. And so this conversation, in that spirit, it is a beginning. I want to say there is no easy way to have this conversation, but it is right to have this conversation. And so I just want to put out there that this is probably going to be hard for most of us for different reasons. I want to invite folks to sit in the room and to be as honest as possible. And in that honesty, hold caring for each other. And it's honesty towards constructing, towards moving, towards getting on that train, towards riding that bicycle. If you don't ride trains, ride a bicycle. So, and some difficult things may come up, and it is okay for folks to step out if you need to step out. That is all good, because we all are where we are, and we have to take care of ourselves, and this stuff could bring up real hard shit, real talk. And so I wanted to say that, and let me see my notes. I told them I was gonna riff, and so I'm riffing. So this is gonna be a conversation where we have pulled together, we've been talking about political home, and we might talk about family. I want to mark a lot of us don't know each other. And so I don't want to make light of saying we're family, because some of us don't know each other. And so it's important to say we need to get to know each other. But what I want to say is that most of the folks on this panel, and most of the folks that help put this panel together, are people that I have deep relationships with and have deep respect for. And so we thought it was fundamentally important to ground this conversation in our experience, but also people who are on the front lines, people who are practitioners, people who are experts in this question, who are working at this intersection. And so the first part of this conversation is going to be, we're going to be hearing from 4 people who are working at this intersection, people who I would consider part of my family. I just met you, but I like you. And so we're going to first hear from them, then we're going to do some pair share, and then we're going to flow. And so I'm telling you, we're gonna make the road by walking a little bit here, y'all. And we're gonna take this as we can. We're gonna be drawing upon the wisdom of the compañeras and compañeros here, and also the wisdom in this room. But what we're trying to get to is, Mervin said something that I was like, spoke to my heart, is that there's a way where, just saying blanket black brown unity is it's a really cheapened way to talk about what it is we need to do. And so what I would hope we get out of this is some deeper understanding, deeper awareness, and interventions that we think are important to make in this idea of black-brown unity. What if we call it something else? What are the protocols? What are the things we're striving for? What are the real deal challenges? Because I don't know about y'all, I'm tired of just calling it like slapping a banner together and let's go have a press conference. That's not the unity that we need right now. And so I hope this is the beginning of a conversation. Okay? So there was a little bit of a challenge here, so I'm gonna call 2 people up. We're gonna do a little game. So 2 of you, any 2 volunteers? We couldn't figure out who was gonna go first. So this is gonna be a battle. Yeah, not a dance-off. We're gonna make it really easy. Just to show the spirit of flow, we're gonna have a little tournament of who's going first. And so we're gonna do a game of rock, paper, scissors. And everybody's gonna see. Alright. We're gonna rev up, and we're gonna go. It's rock, paper, scissors. No inventen, no other cosas. No, one round y luego vienen las otras. Okay, 1, 2, 3.
Rock, paper, scissors.
I guess so. We'll take that.
Hi, everybody. I didn't know what was going on, so I definitely wasn't first in the chairs. Okay. So my name is Carla Gonzalez. I'm from Los Angeles, California. I am born, bred, raised, everything in Los Angeles. My family came from El Salvador. That's right, all my truchas in the house. My family came from El Salvador in the early 80s, 80 and 81. Both my parents migrated here with all of my family. I grew up in I was the only Salvadorian in a very Mexican neighborhood. That was my reality. That's all I knew. I didn't really leave my neighborhood outside of going to work with my parents, right? So going to more rich houses, or la casa de los americanos, that's what we call them, you know? Later I knew that I was one of them too, but I didn't understand what americano meant, right? It meant white folks to me and my family. So I grew up in a very Mexican neighborhood. I grew up being the only Salvadoreña, understanding that my family spoke differently, understanding that my family looked different, right? I was very much one of the darker ones in my family, and then in my neighborhood, in my classrooms, all of that. Somebody said I was really smart. One of the teachers was like, look, Mom, you need to put her in some magnet classes, you need to put her in some, classes that are going to advance her, because this school is not going to keep her there. My first language was Spanish. I spoke Spanish till the age of 11, even though I was born in the States, because nobody actually noticed that I wasn't learning English. They just kept pushing me through the school system, and I was a great Spanish speaker, and I was a great translator for my parents, but I didn't know how to be fluent, right? In 8th grade, I was pulled out of my neighborhood, which was all that I ever had known, and put into a multiracial school. I didn't know what that meant. I had no idea. People came from different countries. People had different languages. Like, all I knew was television, right? What the media shows me, which back in the 90s wasn't a lot of stuff. It was my first time, 14 years old, Carla, little backpack, walking, to my little school bus, being bussed out 30 minutes out, to a different reality. I had no idea how to interact with people, what to talk about, what we had in common, how to say, oh, I like your bag. I didn't know anything outside of my own culture. I met Asians, I met, different types of white ethnicities, which I didn't know existed. But most importantly, I met Black folks, which for some of you who are not from the West Coast might be a little bit like, what? Like, you didn't know Black folks? In Los Angeles and in general on the West Coast, Black folks are very much the minority in population. And so for me, my family never exposed me. It was a very big cultural difference. I soon understood that most of those black folks lived literally 10 minutes away from me. In the other part of the, poor neighborhood that we didn't go to because we stayed in our part of the poor neighborhood, right? So I'm an 8th grader, I'm learning all this stuff, Romeo and Juliet, all the random shit that they try to teach you in school. Pardon I should really not cuss for your children. I understood that year that my family had a lot of anti-blackness running through us that I didn't even know existed. By just the very language, right? My family called me La Negrita. I just thought that was an endearing term for my dad because I was much darker than him. I then understood that black folks were called that as a way to break them down by Latinos, by people like me, right? So it was super big epiphany that I didn't know. As I grew older and I went to high school and different things, I started to really understand what it meant for our communities for me as a Salvadoreña in particular, as a person who came from a country who was torn by civil war, who in 1932, if you called yourself negro, called yourself indígena, you were murdered, right? Over 42,000 indigenous people in El Salvador were just wiped out because they were claiming their roots. As a Salvadoreña, I didn't know what it meant to be Afro-descendiente or that there was even black folks there, right? 11th grade, I met one of my best friends, Tanya Bernard, raise your hand. Yep, right there. Who we met, and I was like, oh, that's a cool girl, well, let's talk, blah, blah. I go to her house, I see her family pictures, and I'm like, whoa, this is super different. And then walks her dad, this black man speaking full-on Spanish, super fast, like crazy, right? And I'm like, holy shit, holy moly. I have never in my life met a black person that speaks Spanish. I'm 17, 16 years old, that wasn't my reality. I went home, I asked my parents, I said, ¿de dónde somos? Where do we come from? And they're like, what are you talking about? We're Salvadorian. I'm like, okay. But what did my grandpa, how did they look? What happened? And they're like, what are you talking about? We're Salvadorian. So I'm like, all right. I chose to be pro-black at a very young age, which cost me my family, basically. Side note, came out as queer, and side note, all my friends are black. My family thought I was going through something very, very different. I chose to be in multiracial organizing because it felt like I needed to be part of a lot of things I didn't grow up knowing. Even though I knew that I knew my experience, I knew what it felt like to go to immigration with my family, I knew what it felt like to translate, I knew all this stuff. I didn't know what it was to be black in Los Angeles, and I had lived there my whole entire life. So I became an organizer at a very young age and was exposed to a lot of black feminism, basically. I read a whole bunch of stuff, watched a whole bunch of stuff, and just became a person that I wanted to create a family. I wanted to create a community where I felt like the people that I love the most, my family and my friends, could be in a space where nobody's getting called something derogatory, where if you get called something derogatory, you get told, hey, that's not cool. Most of us are in our families, we're the weird ones, we're the ones that dicen algo, ay, no digas eso, no, para que quieres problemas, that I'm that person. So, when I was 16, I was kicked out at my parents' home. Salvadoreños todavía no hablan inglés, they don't speak English yet very well. My family, and Tanya can tell you, any of my friends, they were cruel human beings. But I made it a point in my life to push back on my 69-year-old grandmother. I made it a point to push back on my very abusive father on things that are just wrong, right? We all know what's wrong. And sometimes, for me, it was like, okay, do I take a second to be that person again, or should I just let it go? And for me, I always took that second, right? My little brother had 2 siblings. One is really, really, really light-skinned, hazel eyes. And then there's this other one who's like dark-skinned, has curly hair, and every time he gets in front of the police, when they check out a box, it says black. Every time. They don't ask him, they assume he's a black man. So I knew in my family there had to be something. There had to be a way back in connection to our blackness, which would then inform how we in the future as my children and my family relate to black folks. And thankfully, I work with Dignity and Power now. It's an organization in Los Angeles that works with formerly incarcerated folks that are inside and their loved ones. My brother has been in prison for now 10 years. He's serving a 30-year sentence. And because of the messed up prison system, my family, and particularly my parents, opened their eyes to what injustice looks like. But it wasn't enough to just look at what injustice looks like for our families, but to really see what it looks like for folks that are like us, but also folks who don't look anything like us, but have a lot of commonalities with us. I'm proud to say that this last birthday, my mother turned 52, and for her birthday party, she invited all of my friends to go eat her food at her house, and it was beautiful. And she doesn't know how to speak English, they don't know how to speak Spanish, and yet they still figured that shit out, right? Because there was a level of respect, a level of I want to know, and a level of I'm still freaking ignorant. And I might say some shit that's really offensive, and I trust that you and I will check myself on that, right? So that's my time. I will pass it to Merv. Thank you very much.
Hey everybody. How y'all feeling? Y'all tired? I don't know. You might be a little tired, but I think I'm feeling a little tired, so I'm going to try to bring my best self into the space. So my name is Mervin Marcano, and I am here. I work at Blackbird, which provides communication strategy, campaign support to the movement for Black Lives writ large. And we are also did the movement for Black Lives convening. We work with a bunch of organizations in the space. I'm also a Boricua. This is you, Rosa. Anyway, so I wanted to just talk a little bit about, obviously there's this huge moment we're in right now in terms of this movement around Black lives. And for many of us, as a counterpoint to what Carla was saying, I grew up on the East Coast, I grew up in Brooklyn, right? So the lines between Black and Latino are a lot more fuzzy, right? So I look at a space like this, and I'm like, because the Latino family I grew up with is much more of a mestizaje, and a real mestizaje. That that present some important issues when we're talking about what it means to organize popularly as Latinos. I'm trying with the Latinx. I just learned it yesterday. So I'm on it. I'm on it. Pero I want to ask you a question. Somos familia. Somos familia. So we need to have a family conversation. Okay? Because when our movement says Black Lives Matter, it might make some folks uncomfortable in this room, or maybe outside of this room in your base. And, I think we often struggle with the cheap notion of oh, that's just because certain folks aren't represented, and what about brown lives, right? So let's step back for a second. And when I say Black Lives Matter, when my folks say Black Lives Matter, it's because Black Lives Matter is a conversation we need to have. As what? Black Lives Matter is not just about our relationship to whiteness, it's about our relationship to capitalism, to colonialism, to oppression, to the fact that capitalism has been sustained in our country by a racialized system hierarchy, right? So while the Americans have perfected the racial caste system, that doesn't mean it's the only place where it operates. So let's not get caught up with somos familia, right? Yeah. Okay, todavía. Okay, just checking. Okay, because let's not get caught up in this cheap dynamic where it's black people over here and brown people over here. Because it's ahistorical and it invisibilizes me, right? Number one. Number two, let's not get caught up in cheap understandings and ahistorical understandings of migration and how it happened in this country. Let's talk about citizenship and who gets to accrue the rights of citizenship in this country, right? To who do the rights of citizenship accrue? And it has been the history of this country that preferential migration policies create a system by which the rights of certain folks are fought for through a civil rights industrial complex, for lack of a better term, in relationship with the state. And black folks, American black folks, but blackness is a phenotype here. Aquí, it's a phenotype. That black folks sometimes end up on the short end of the stick of that conversation, right? So we didn't invent this. Our folks, our family didn't invent this, but we play a role in it. And we benefit from it. So what the right wants us to do is argue amongst ourselves about whether or not black folks are more dangerous, or whether or not Mexicans are stealing black people's jobs from them, when in fact, the only way for us to not get pitted against each other is to make sure that our house is clean. Y la casa no está limpia. So I don't want to take up too much time because I want everybody else to go. But I do want to leave you with that question of citizenship. What does it mean? Who benefits? Who loses? Especially when we think about it in a global context, right? And then I want to leave you with the question of, as you think about your families, because this is a political question, but it also plays out in our families too. My mother was La Negra, right? My grandmother worked very hard to no avail to make sure that the bloodline was clean, but that's just not how love works. And yet we continue to try. We continue to try. So let's think about how it operates in our own families, but each and every person in this room here is a nexus point. You are connected to communities. You work in bases. You work in cities that are undergoing vast transformations. Huge transformations, particularly in some of our larger cities, in terms of what those populations look like, who's losing and who's winning. Let's make sure that we're keeping that in mind, because the only way to build real relationship and to build real alliance is to make sure that we know that when we say Black Lives Matter, we're not just looking out there, but we're looking in here too.
No one said I'm going to be standing. I'm so nervous.
Maria, and I come from the incredible borough of the Bronx in New York. And I want to share just a little bit about what does anti-Blackness look like in New York and in our communities, particularly as someone who sits at the intersection of gender and of race, and thinking about what that looks like when we're talking about home, right? Like, what is that home? So thinking about what that looks like in my home. And I've even struggled with naming what home is to me. ¿Y quién son Mijente? Right? Like, who are my people? So I am Dominican, but I am Black. I am Black Dominican. And I'm able to say that after years and years and years of really processing what that looks like, coming from a family that is Haitian and Dominican, coming from a family that is also white from my dad's side, and thinking about all those complexities and what does that mean for me, and then landing right now in a moment where we are seeing a huge human rights crisis back in the island. That may be new to some folks in the room, but it's not a new phenomenon, particularly when we're thinking about the work of colonialism, the work of imperialism, and the work of white supremacy on ourselves, on our bodies, and our relationship to people that look just like us. Growing up, it was always like, your nose is so broad, your hair is so crazy, tiene pelo malo, pero tú eres blanquita, so you'll be okay, right? And thinking about what my light skin could mean in terms of advancing socially and economically, and having that be something that is that I'm constantly confronting with folks that look like me, folks that are darker than me, and then also people that I call them family. And that has been an experience that is not unique to me, and I don't claim that it is unique to me. The Dominican Republic, I'll go into a really short history of this box, and then I'll move on. So the Dominican Republic shares the island of Hispaniola with Haiti, and there was a time right after the Haitian Revolution where it was one island, and it was the reunification of the island. And it was under Haitian control, and there was a reorganization of land, money, and power. And then there was a kicking out of the Catholic Church as an institutional power. And what that did was that it frustrated, pissed off white landowners from Spain who controlled property in the island. And we saw a counter-revolution that then created again Haiti y la República Dominicana, Santo Domingo. And in that process, as we're talking about anti-Blackness, we like to name Trujillo, who was the dictator of the Dominican Republic, but it happened way before. It's in the racial formation of the country and of the island. And most recently, we've seen the denationalization of hundreds of thousands of Dominicans of Haitian descent, right? So these are folks that were born in the Dominican Republic, that are Dominican, that know nothing but the Dominican Republic, who are now being told that they are stateless and they are being deported. And it's been a tactic that we've taken from the United States, which the Dominican government has taken from the United States and imported into their country, right? So we're seeing the creation of secure fences, right, and borders, and then deporting hundreds and hundreds of folks that know nothing of Haiti, that don't have a home in Haiti, that don't have family in Haiti, right? And that is a product of white supremacy. So as we're thinking about what does anti-Blackness looks like, it's not just the interpersonal, right? And that hurts. The interpersonal hurts, right? The destruction of relationships within families, communities, that hurts. But for me, what hurts more is the destruction of a people and the genocide of a people. And that's what's happening right now in the Dominican Republic, and that's what's happening right now in this country. And if we allow ourselves to practice white supremacy, right, if we allow ourselves to say, yes, Black and brown unity, but are not uplifting the dismantling of anti-Blackness and anti-Black racism, then racial justice cannot exist in this country, right? And for me, I'll end with this, just saying that it is our responsibility to challenge each other when we see it personally, but it is our duty, right? It is our charge as a people. If we say que somos la raza, right? If we're over here saying familia this, familia that, it is our responsibility to dismantle anti-Blackness because my liberation depends on it, right? I can't be free until a Black woman is free, right? So we want this conversation to be a conversation that we can have each other and ourselves, but really propel our movement into a new direction where we are talking about decolonizing solidarity, right? That when we say solidarity, we show up. And we show up because our liberations are tied. And my Blackness is my liberation. Thank you.
Hey folks, my name is Paulina and I am originally from Veracruz, Mexico. That's right. Jarochos in the house? All right. Right. So as many of you know, Veracruz is also one of the parts of it because it sits in the Gulf of Mexico, that it was also a very well-known, obviously, port, that also a lot of folks, Black folks that were brought over from Africa to become slaves in Latin America, in Mexico, were rooted in Veracruz. So there's a long-standing Black Mexican community, literally like in the place that I grew up, we're like in the next county over from Yanga, Veracruz. So if you've never heard of Yanga, look it up with a Y. And I say that to say that part of, I feel like, the healing work and part of why I'm so committed to having deeper rooted, spiritually grounded unity work between Black and brown folks and between indigenous folks and Black folks is because colonization has not just changed our names for us, but it has literally put on a different lens of how we even see each other. And what we think is of a real Mexican history, right? Like a lot of us talk about like the Mexican Revolution, how we were kicking ass and taking names. But we don't like to talk about all the ways that Black folks in Latin America, in Mexico, have been kicking ass and taking names since 1609 and prior, right? And so a lot of my work growing up in the South, I came to the US when I was 12. And grew up in North Carolina, rural, country-ass North Carolina. It's not Durham. I know people are like, I know Durham. It is not Durham. It is in the fields and the farm, and really in farmland, right? A lot of fields where a lot of our farm worker folks, a lot of Mexicanos, all the Mexicanos that I knew and grew up with were farm workers. And my family was doing farm work at the time. And I definitely feel like I evolved politically from the generosity of Southern Black folks. That a lot of my politicizing around race came from Black folks being like, here you go, little Mexican girl. Don't let white people fool you. Don't think because you're light-skinned, you're gonna get away with everything. Look around you, open up your eyes, see what is happening around you. And so that was the context in which I was politicized. I was falling in love with Tupac as I was learning English, honey. I was like singing in the car like, yeah, that's right. Like, oh. And it's true. And then to me, like, that is so much of the context be for Latinos in the US and for Latinos in the South. Is that so much of our political education, so much of what we know and understand to be true about race, we have learned because of the generosity of Southern Black communities. And really the Black-led struggle in the US. And so for me, a part of the work that SONG does and why we're so deeply vested in unity work, one is because that's what we were founded to do 23 years ago. We were started as a multiracial organization to build and incubate unity funds. And at the time, because we were founded by 3 white lesbians and 3 Black lesbians, it was very much thinking about unity between Black and white folks, right? And then the Latino migration began to happen. A lot of our people began to move down south, a lot of API folks, a lot of other immigrant communities of color. And we were beginning to really contend what race meant to each of us. What did it mean to be white in the South? Right? What did it mean that Latinos wanted to be white in the South? To not be treated like shit. And that we were told that that was the one strategy that was going to keep us from being killed, that that was the one strategy that was going to keep us from starving, that that was the one strategy right, to keep our children out of jail, is if we align with whiteness, right? Versus the reality of what was happening all around us, which is that in North Carolina, we were very strategically, and I was all over the South, but in North Carolina, it looked like, for example, the ways that we were competing against each other was that, for example, I remember the first time I tried to go get my learner's permit to drive. That went to the DMV. And the DMV in North Carolina, it's white run. It's still white run. All the top people are primarily white. But all the people that we dealt with in the front, or all the frontline people that you walk in and talk to, are black women. And in rural North Carolina, that was very strategic. Why? Because a lot more Latinos and a lot more Mexicanos were going to go get their licenses, right? And they were being told no by black women. No, you don't have the right papers. No, this, like, and just like, right, like the state runaround, right? The like, no, it's not, it's the, you know, it's a papeles son chuecos. That's not the right one, or like, that was fake. And that became the narrative in the Latino community was like, whoa, black people don't want us here, right? And we knew it was deeper than that, but that's just the easy thing to reach for. It is an easy thing to say who is telling me yes, who is telling me no, and like bump all of y'all, right? Versus the reality that we have been consistently pitted against each other, and we're trying to recover from our own heartache of feeling worthless, right? Of being robbed oftentimes of our time and place, of being robbed of our sacred times, of being robbed of our sacred spaces. And that the pain of colonization actually to me personally, it's been racial justice work has been a journey of healing, actually. Healing from my own shame, healing from all the fucked up things that have happened around me that I didn't intervene on. All the things that I've watched happen in my family, in my organizations, in our work, in our movements, in our coalitions, when we didn't step up and do the right thing, right? And I'm not saying that we know what the right thing is. I'm not saying that I know what the right thing is. But it is to actually have the willingness to say, who is the broader we? Who is the broader we? And so I just want to invite us into a new moment, a new conversation, a new set of honest, I feel like honest, and like to uncover a little bit of like our heartache around what some of this is so we can reclaim our wholeness. And that to me is the legacy of like colonization. It is literal, spiritual, physical, social dismemberment, y'all. It is literally the dismemberment of our people. And to me, part of our work is, who's the family? What parts are we missing? Why are we missing? And who is actually showing up and for what? So I invite you into a new moment. I invite you into the struggle of that moment. I know a lot of us are already deep in it. Some of the most like generous conversations that I've had with people around race and class have been are people in this room. And I think we have so much more to offer future generations so that we are not disconnecting our Black and Latino communities and pretending like we are not of each other. So, that's
fantastic start, right? When empiezo. So what we're gonna do now is ask you to find someone at your table, pair up with someone, and just spend a couple minutes, make sure both of you speak, and just talk about, I think folks that came up here, really different spectrum, different experiences, but modeled, the kind of conversations we can have. So how have you experienced, what have your experiences been? How have you seen anti-Blackness manifest in your family, in your community, in your workplace, in your school? Just turn to, someone next to you. Doesn't have to be like a table conversation. Just pair up with folks. We're gonna give a few minutes so folks can have a chance to dialogue with each other. Okay?
Marisa, stop.